I'm ready.
As ready as we ever are.
What's up, everybody? It's Indie Game Business. I'm Indy. That's Jay way over there, and this is Stephanie right here in the middle. It's a Stephanie
Hello.
sandwich. Yeah, an Indie Game Business. How's it going, Stephanie? Tell us.
Stephanie, great.
Yes.
It's going great. We're doing good.
Who's Stephanie? You guys may be asking. Well, Jay knows her. I have no idea who she is.
So Stephanie and her husband founded XLOC 20 years ago. Is that correct?
Pretty much, yes.
So it was
And
like
so-
back in when I was your age, one of those kind of
Back when we used Cuneiform to communicate in games.
back before TeamSpeak.
And I was just a baby, right?
I know. She was only like 12 when she started the company. And,
Right.
you know, they started doing, I'll let Stephanie give you the whole spiel, but now they run a fantastic localization management tool set, which is used by Activision and Riot and Take-Two and all of these other, huge companies. And localization is what she specializes in. And it's something that's important to us. We always want, the developers out there to be aware of why it's important. Like the guys from Megacrit, a couple of weeks ago, talking about how many units they had sold in China. So let's just kick it over. And Stephanie, so tell us a little bit about the company, but then give us the story, how the two of you got into it, what it evolved into, and how things have progressed over the last 2 decades.
Wow, that's a big order. Okay. So yeah, we were in the industry in the early 90s, started, and this was before like localization. Well, localization has always been sort of the bastard child of game development for a lot of people. And in some respects it still is. It's something that's low on the priority, but it has such a bang for the buck that we're actually really surprised, and I'm still surprised to this day, that people don't necessarily want to realize 30 to 50% of a game's revenue can be generated from a global outreach and localizations. So I was working, both of us were actually working at Activision back in the day, shout out to Activision. And we actually had a forward-thinking producer that was thinking that they wanted to release 2 languages simultaneous, English and German. And this was working on Civilization Call to Power. And that was unheard of, because back then in the 90s, you released your localized titles 2 weeks, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months after the main SKU development. And this was a radical thought that, okay, how are we going to manage to, with all the changes that happened during development, how are we going to manage 2 languages at once? And I was actually his associate producer at the time, and was thinking about, and also asset management and working with all of the assets. And when Jay and I were talking earlier, we were talking about, okay, what's a horror story? Well, that horror story was that all of our text in game during development was hard coded. And so that was like the first thought. It's like, oh my God, we can't do this. So how are we going to export into a text file and have string ID references and create our UI that would enable us to have 2 languages and or subsequent languages? So that was really the first hurdle, and my first foray into kind of understanding, okay, how are we looking at game development, and how can we make this whole process more friendly to me, that I wasn't there at 2 o'clock in the morning copying and pasting in Excel files and trying to figure out where the hell all the stuff had come. We've all been there, right? So luckily, during the whole process, we were successful. And the game did great. It did great in both territories, and we were able to expand as well. And I kind of became, I don't know, I guess on the inside of the LA studio, sort of knowledgeable about Activision's localization process. And the genesis of XLOC was really built upon that knowledge and that growth for them. And, I was responsible. I actually left the LA studio because Mason had gone out. Mason is my husband and is also the architect and CTO of XLOC itself. And but they wanted me to continue this management for future games. And I said, okay, but I'm going to create some sort of a tool that allows me to be able to manage this process, because we didn't really necessarily have a tool during Civ, but it was at least exploring that option. So we put our heads together. Mason was a game programmer, but had left to go to business e-commerce, database management, that whole bubble way back in the late 90s, early aughts. And we put our heads together, and that was the genesis of XLOC, something that was central repository that all key players could access, but that would help streamline the process, analyze what had changed from a source perspective, what the translators had changed, rebuild the data, and output it for the development cycle. Simultaneously, while the main language is being developed and all the changes that come through consistently up until the 11th hour. And that was the genesis of what XLOC as a content management system was. It's definitely from a production and development side. It wasn't, we knew translators knew how to translate. We didn't want to tell developers how they should develop. We wanted something that was open architecture that allowed for, we could accept any file formats. We could work with whatever translation environment that was needed. And that was our goal, is really to be that bridge, is to hook everybody together. And, that was the genesis, and that was what we have continued to evangelize over the 20 years, was that collaborative environment for working with all the key players. And as Localizations has become a little bit less of a bastard child, it's just the stepchild now.
Not a lot, a little.
A little. We still evangelize that. We still talk about why it's worthwhile to have a collaborative environment to be able to do that, how you can scale, and how you can reach that bigger revenue margin from a global perspective. So
for those of you
I just have one
there,
question.
Yes.
20 years ago, when you were doing that, did you copy and paste? Did you control C, or? I mean, I don't remember. How did you copy and paste back then?
You did Control C.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's ingrained in my finger memory.
Yeah, typing muscle memory for Control C, Control V.
Right.
So, and this is something, for those of you out there who have done localizations or have managed or have thought about it, the typical, most basic way to do it is an Excel spreadsheet. And so, what Stephanie and Mason have built is something that's much deeper than that. You go in at the very beginning, and we talk a lot with the tool sets about how when you have to come in and put something in at beta, when you go, okay, by the way, we should probably have this in Mandarin, that causes issues. So, what XLOC's system does is let you do it from the get-go. So,
right, we wanted to eliminate, because a lot of times that transfer from the game engine to Excel is a human doing it, right? And we wanted to eliminate human errors. Humans are complex and they make mistakes, and even if they don't want to, they still do, because it's 3 o'clock in the morning. And so our goal really was to work with as close to source as we could. But you're right, Jay. I mean, you have all of these, copying, even that process was copying and pasting to Excel, or creating these documents for the translators to write. And we still see that today, which is fascinating. But our goal was really to work with people, hopefully to get to as close to the engine as possible.
Yeah, because every time a human touches something, there's chance for error.
There's total chance for error, exactly. And we've built in, checks and things like that to try to mitigate some of that. But we still see it to this day, and especially with young developers or indie developers who are trying to cut corners and things like that. And I understand why, but it turns out to be way less efficient and way less and too much of a headache. We wanted localizations to stop being a headache and stop being something that, the AP that had done something and was relegated to localizations versus a pride in being able to reach a global audience. And so we're really trying to continue to evangelize that.
It builds on it. It's like one of those circular problems, because localization is relegated down to that stepchild status. You typically have one of the most junior people on the team that's doing it. which further exasperates the problem of it being done wrong. And, it brings in all of these other products. So, I was happy a few years ago when I saw GDC actually had like a localization track going on. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. They're actually starting to take this seriously now.
The problem I would see with that, Jay, from my experience, has been that we end up preaching to the choir.
Yep.
We end up preaching to the people that actually kind of know all this stuff, rather than, because it's not the cool, sexy bit of game development.
Because when somebody says localization, it's kind of like,
yeah, it's kill me now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not the latest AI. It's not virtual reality. It's not but it's still this consistent process that is happening, 20, 25 years now later.
You could have the
all you need to do is say,
make localization cool again or something like that.
It's localization with ray tracing. And then you'll absolutely fill up everything. But it is, and that's part of my issue with GDC anyway, and part of where this show came from was the people that need to hear this stuff can't afford a $2,500 ticket to get into GDC, plus the $1,000 they're going to spend in a room and all that sort of stuff. So, I mean, that's exactly what.
Drawn with Lead says, I think that's because the indie scene suffers from a lot of talented creators that are poor at business. Well, I don't know if I would say they're poor. It's just they don't know. Because
it's both.
Well, I'm sure it is. There's people that are poor at business, but if you've never done it, you're a developer, you're a coder, you don't know how to animate, you don't know, that you should be thinking about localization first instead of as an afterthought. But but I can also understand that perspective as an indie developer. With so many games out there, the game could totally flop, and it's like, well, we just spent all this time and money doing localization, and it's not even doing anything. Well, I guess maybe you give it a chance to flop in more places. I mean, I don't.
Or
this is the pessimist side over here.
But maybe it picks up in a different territory rather than the territory that the developer is part of.
Exactly,
right?
Just like the maker
you never
stuff.
know. It doesn't. Who said that? Michael Jordan is like, you've never succeeded in the shots that you didn't try or whatever. I mean, he's got I'm horrible.
You were this close.
Oh, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
There you go. See, you knew what I was talking about. So
this is the pessimist side over here.
That's a horrible thing for a shooting guard to say in the first place, because that just means he's going to start throwing up shots all over the place.
But if you partner with people or consult with people or use references because there are enough people that do know what they're talking about with regards to localization, and it's not hard. So because part of what I have done too is here in North Carolina at Raleigh at NC State, they have a game development specialty.
Oh,
Sorry.
I had something in my throat there. It's like a wolf whining about a referee. I don't know what it was. Anyway.
But they are strong in engineering. You have to give them that.
Yes, I do.
And I appreciate that they have a game development specialty within their engineering department. And XLOC has actually sponsored their game development showcase, which in the spring, they have their class is to bring a game from concept to completion. In 16 weeks with these, and usually there's about 3 or 4 games. So these are students that are indie developers that want to make games that have an idea and they want to figure out how to do it. Well, with my partnership with them, I'm actually going in and lecturing to them. I mean, having a collaborative communication with them about why they should consider localizations, why they should consider, and how they can do it easily enough within their engine to make their game portable to another language. So I
mean, that does sound pretty intriguing. It's a localization lecture. Yes, everyone's like, yes.
Yeah, no, the attendance is usually low, so I have to surprise them. No, I'm kidding. No, but the professor has made it part of their requirement that the game must be, as part of their passing requirement, that the game must be localized in a language. Even if it's leet speak or something similar, you have to be able to show that you can swap from one language to another.
That is awesome.
So that, and I would love to get out to more universities and do these types of lectures. I just do it here because I'm local, but I think that's because my goal was that if these are the future game developers of the world, they should know this so that when they go to their start their studio or go to Epic or go to Activision or go to wherever, they're not going, what? Localization? They're like, oh yeah, this crazy woman came and talked to me about this issue, and why don't we incorporate it so we can reach 30% of more revenue?
I think that's great that that's part of the requirements for that class. And I just want to do a shout out to App Lady, who is working out at the gym while listening to the Indie Game Business Show. Woo! Good for you. I should be at the gym while we're doing this. That's what we should do. We should all be working out. Indie Game Business workout hour.
Yeah.
Any links for Stephanie's coming? Okay, you got it there. Nice.
I'm on it. I actually have Streambot pulled up this time.
All right.
I'm totally on it. All right. So, and that philosophy that state has is, again, very key to why we do this, because it's constantly frustrating. Just as the lack of localization education is frustrating to you, the lack of business education is frustrating to me. And it's like, why can we send, students to learn how to code and draw and produce and even design, but we don't tell them anything about how to actually sell their game or run their business or do localization. So the fact that they've got that in there, that is awesome.
Yeah, that's and it widens their perspective. And just for clarification, Jay did not mean stream bot; he meant stream chat bot.
Whatever.
Just to clarify that. Well, people are up in arms about people botting right now. As you can tell, we have tens of thousands of people watching, so you can tell that our bots. Okay.
No, it's Streamlabs chat bot.
Yeah.
So. I'm going to ask you a lot of questions that I know the answer to, but it's okay. When should a developer start preparing and or working on their localizations?
At conception, really. They should start thinking about it when they're developing their file structures or their engine consideration. I would also consider what territories you want to try to reach and what specifications are needed for those territories. So you're talking about, because it even affects UI design, making sure that text can fit in your UI. If you choose, for example, German is usually 20% larger in their text size, or in the actual text that just explains what's going on. So you need to consider that if you're wanting to reach that audience. If you want to reach into Asia, you need to be able to have, support kanji characters and be able to support that alphabet. So from my perspective, the sooner the better to actually be thinking about this. Then when you're setting up your engine and you're setting up your directory structures, there are easy ways to be able to make it so that you can just swap out an English directory structure for a French directory structure, and then in your engine you call that French directory structure, and bam, you have a French version of your game once you fill it with the localized assets. It's not difficult if you're thinking about it early on in the process. From a production management and a tool management perspective, we also like it earlier the better, because it allows us to help our clients work their production pathways for localizations, and then on release, it's automatic. The process is automatic, and you're just sitting back, getting all that revenue, and you're not necessarily having to go, oh crap, I can't support an umlaut. Why am I not supporting an umlaut? In this issue. So the earlier you test your process along, the better you will be at the end. Or now we have games with continuous release, so you just want to be able to continuously release that data and those assets to your audience, and you can just continue to do that without those 11th hour headaches, which we saw plenty of back in the day, that were localization specific.
And Drawn with Lead had a good concept. A good comment there. He says in all the studios that he's been in, it is something that they're thinking about at pre-production, which is, ironically enough, that's not the norm. We see this stuff constantly, that they're coming at the last minute. And so you brought up the 30 to 50% revenue, which is fantastic. It makes me feel like I'm not completely out of it, because when we, back in my days of doing publishing and developing, we consistently saw a 40% revenue increase overall outside of English.
Wow.
And so the fact that it's still in that range that's awesome. And it speaks to the longevity. Localization isn't a fad. It's not like, oh, well, we're going to support Chinese this month because, somebody sold a bunch of copies in China. The reality is there are certain territories that are going to be different. We had titles that sold 1 million copies in Spain, which is next to impossible to do, but didn't sell anything over here. And had we not done, that extra step to get the Spanish version in there, it never would have happened.
Right.
So when a studio is looking at how many languages they should do, which languages should they do, how should they go about tackling that problem? And is there, I know, 10, 15 years ago, there was a certain set of languages that we all did. And now, there are more that weren't even in that list anymore. So where's a good starting point? Where should they go to figure out what they're doing? I mean, what they should do and all that kind of good stuff.
So that's an interesting point. And I actually don't fully know the answer to that question because I've been so head deep into tool development myself. But there are people whose jobs it is from a marketing perspective to study territories, to study what sells there and what doesn't, and to have for example, I know for a while, like Spider-Man wasn't selling in Italy, and I'm like, what do the Italians have against Spider-Man? I don't understand. So when we were working on the Spider-Man, we would do figs minus the I. So we do French, Spanish, and German, and it would be like that's so interesting because figs, French, German, Italian, Spanish or French, Italian, German, Spanish is usually what were the standard languages for localizations back in the day. So and I think that has a lot to do with marketing. It has a lot to do and I know big studios have specialists in those areas that will tell you, okay, what type of revenue would you be able to garner from this territory versus that territory. So a lot of it is about that research of the culture, research of what types of games sell there. I'm not an expert in that by any means, but there are people that are, and there are people that have studied that and that have a concept of what will sell, and vice versa. Asia, Japan, China, I mean, they have a huge games market, and the West hardly sees any of them, partly because not going to sell as well here. So understanding that and that culture and those cultural differences is what's important. And it does take a little bit of research and time.
Yeah, and as we're going through that, I'm actually pulling up Steam Spot to see if that's something that Sergey has in there. And you're right, eFigs was always the standard.
Right.
English, French, Italian, German, Spanish. But, Italian has really dropped out of there.
Yeah.
Spanish into Spain has dropped, but of course we still have Central America, South America. But the other ones that we've seen grow over the years is Polish, German, Polish, Russian, and of course like Chinese. And so we're seeing more of those, but it is very much a situation where that's going to vary from genre to genre.
It is. It's going to vary genre to genre, and Arabic is big as well. More and more games that we're seeing coming through with XLOC in Arabic, and that is fascinating because not only are you dealing with a different character set, but you're dealing with right to left as opposed to left to right, and for display purposes and all of that stuff. So that adds a whole new can of worms. But it's really interesting to see what type of games are interesting to that market, even from my sample set from our clients' perspective, and what versions they're trying to, or what games they're trying to release into those territories. So yeah, it's really interesting.
12 Days of Indie actually had a good point. We're also starting to see more games that are coming from Japan into North America and need to be translated into English. Yeah. So the wider the market gets with digital distribution, the more cross-pollination of all of this stuff that pops up.
Right.
So I mean, yeah, and that's it is, and that's very much a theme on this show anyway. There's no one right answer to any of it. You need to look and see what's a good fit for your game and your genre and all of this kind of stuff.
Exactly.
who was it we had the other day on? Oh, it was Fail Better Games, and we were talking about localization, and it's like they had however many thousands of words in, their game, and it's an indie studio. It's very difficult for them to go in and start, translating all of that and localizing all that. So,
thank you for the follow, Lemmy Remy. Thank you.
Awesome. So, as people are, as we're sitting down and we're a studio and we've got this, we're in pre-production, we've got the idea for what we're going to do. We've done some research to figure out the primary languages we need to start planning for. What is it at that stage and into early production that they need to be aware of? That they need to, there's things like the W rule, and for UI, and what should be factored in and what should they be thinking about as they go into and through pre-production to be ready to start doing localization properly?
Well, part of it is your directory setup, externalizing your text, all of those things that will help to make the localization process easier and better. But also, there's also the cultural aspect of it, and to make sure that the content of your game is appropriate from a cultural perspective of the territories to which you're hoping to reach. We always go back to the World War II games in Germany and the Hitler references and things like that aren't appropriate for that culture. So you have to take that into consideration. If you want to reach an Arabic audience, for example, you probably don't want to be bashing certain religions or things like that. So, you have to, or if there are, Korea has specific requirements with regards to blood, those types of things. So you need to be in a consideration of that, or how your engine is going to be able to handle that if you want to reach those territories. But from a logistical perspective, if you want to prep your game to be localization ready, regardless of the territories, it is things like making sure that your engine can support the alphabets of where you're wanting to go, externalizing your text, externalizing your even your VO directory, if you're adding any VO, externalizing to some extent your or being able to easily identify and swap out your localized assets for your main language assets, so that it's an easy swap and an easy flip to the localization. Most important, I think, is to establish that partnership with who's going to be helping you to do this, because again, there are a lot of professionals out there. There are a lot of translators out there. There are a lot of people like me as consultants that can help. And I think establishing the partnership and knowing that you don't have to do this all on your own is an important aspect as well.
All right, so I'm going to ask a question, then I have to go get my assistant and bring her in again before she comes through this window.
Okay, I'm going to take a drink. I'm going to take a swig.
So, what are the biggest mistakes that you see, small or even big studio, the common things that you see getting people tripped up over and over and over again over the last 2 decades? And I'll be right back.
I would say, number one, not having a nice tool set, not having established your localization process early on. I think that's a big mistake, to be honest. I think that trying to come in and do it after the fact makes it a lot harder and a lot more stressful.
And it probably costs a lot more.
And it costs a lot more. And that's what I was going to say, is that not being willing to put a little bit of money up front for the localization process, I think bites everybody in the ass at some point. Thinking that that's where you can cut in your budget, and maintaining that perspective that, oh, well, it's just localizations, I think is a detriment to what you hopefully are trying to do. So, I mean, that's probably the biggest. We have come in at the last minute with some titles that have, been using other tools, and now they need something to really get them going. And that's last minute, and that's great, but that makes it hairy to process. Planning is the biggest issue. And we work with a lot of big studios that have embraced localization finally and do that stuff now, but it's the smaller ones that are overcomplicating their lives with the complicated file formats that they're trying to implement, and just making it we're like, why does this have to be so complicated? It really, I don't think does. But they're not willing to really consider, because it works for the main language. And so they don't take into consideration, okay, how is this really complicated XML going to be localized and realize what it is that you guys need for delivery.
Kelsor de Taranes, thank you so much for the follow. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm starting to come down with whatever, that came home with school for my 6-year-old.
Right. Just in time for the holiday weekend.
I'm really looking forward to it.
What's a holiday weekend exactly?
Yeah, really.
I don't know. I just took my first vacation in 2 years a couple weeks ago. So, yeah.
Oh, that's nice. My family all went to Disneyland and I stayed home and worked. Which was kind of nice on its own, but.
So, I mean, and that planning becomes such a huge issue because the cost in both time and money just goes up exponentially.
Exactly.
As you get closer and closer to launch, especially, with, the current world of live ops. So, I mean, how have you seen localization itself and management and that stuff change through, the last, especially, 10 to 15 years as we've gone from, PC games and console games into the world of mobile and, now into the world of live ops across the board.
Right.
What have you seen that's changed along that route?
I think there's more specialists, like people that are internally hired to be localization managers within the companies themselves. And that's who we usually establish the relationships with, and will be the evangelist for localizations for the company. And I think that has really helped those companies grow. And to not necessarily have just some, associate producer who is responsible for everything else, and then, also localizations. To be overseeing this. I mean, you can multitask in that way. Localization, especially if you have a quality tool like mine.
Subtle plug.
If I'm going to sit here on Twitch, I'm going to sell. But if you have that processes and you have this just set up, you can multitask in that respect. But there needs to be a point person. There needs to be somebody internally that's evangelizing the process. And that is the connection to why we need to think about it, and can be at those production meetings to go, okay, that's a great idea. How are we going to implement it from a localization perspective? Rather than a vendor, your translator, coming in and saying, well, I don't know what to do here, and being, a few steps down. So we've seen more and more and more evangelists or localization project managers hired within companies. It certainly could be something that is an external consultant that works for developer or publisher. Publishers more so have that financial backing to be able to support that. But hiring a consultant to be able to evangelize is worthwhile. I actually know a number of people that have done that and set in with indie developers as their consultant for localizations, and will participate in their production meetings and bring up the these issues that should be considered when you're doing your pre-planning or planning or even development themselves. But I was going to say, to your point, Jay, earlier, is that the time and energy costs is very subjective, and we keep trying to figure out, okay, how can we sell that concept that, look, you're going to save time and you're going to save money. Now, we know that in our heads, but to put it down on paper is really hard, because if you're not working on copying and pasting Excel, you should be working on making the game better. So it's not like you're going to be working less, but you're going to be working on functions that make the game better instead of having to do this grunt work that still is time intensive and time work. So it's a very subjective concept to try to consider. Hopefully the quality of games, the quality of titles that come out are just, if you're implementing all of these ideas, are that much better. That's the hope.
Yeah, and that's what we were talking about before we actually went live. Was when I started my firm, Stephanie and Mason were one of my first clients, and as I've worked through the years, and localization is always so front of mind with what I've done. I came in and they were like, we need you to help to get this, to put this message out there in front of more developers and publishers. And I'm like, this is going to be easy. It is not, because people, it's not front of mind. It's like, why should we spend time localizing into these languages, which a lot of the time they really have no inclination about how much potential revenue it can be, versus their marketing team, sitting over here going, did you catch that? My assistant's now asleep. They're sitting over here going, well, if we add 4 more things to in-app purchases and 6 more skins this week instead, we know exactly how much money we're going to make. And so it does require work, and it does. Things like Steam Spy are fantastic because you can go in there and look. It's like, okay, this game sold this many units in English, and then it sold this many units in German as well. And you can start doing a little bit of correlation, but it is very hard for people who aren't, like Stephanie and I, to sit down and say, okay, is this really worth us doing it? And so that's why the junior people get put on it, and that's why it doesn't really
it's
much better.
It rolls down it rolls down the hill. It's difficult, and we still fight that. I mean, we still to this day, when we're demoing for clients, when we're talking about with clients about why they would need a content management system, I can just do it in Excel. I can just do it in Google Docs. And I'm like, okay, good luck. Good luck to you. I think that seems a little bit amateur, and I hate to say that because I so appreciate indie developers or small developers that are working in like bootstrapping their process through. I would just like them to be able to focus on really making the game better and not having to do all the niggly stuff that that dissuades them from localizing their game,
So I had a question, and then Drawn with Lead just made me laugh, and so now I've lost my question. So it's best when you hear that startups that brush you off when you ask about localization, and then they tell you they're making an MMO. Like, yes, exactly.
Exactly.
That is the problem. All right, so walk us through. I mean, we don't need like the full high level pitch and the whole sales deck, but I want people to know why they need more than Excel and Google spreadsheets to get this done, because they are correct. Yes, you can do it with a spreadsheet. It's not the best way to do it, but how does what you and Mason have built at XLOC improve upon that process from the folks that are just sitting there doing it with a spreadsheet?
Sure. So the nature of game development is all about change, really. So because change happens consistently in development up to the point of release, and then with the continuous development cycles, the beyond. So to managing what those changes are is difficult in and of itself, and making sure that something and someone, or in our case, XLOC, is tracking that data. So you have a whole history of what's changed, what has been updated, what is new. From a translation perspective, depending on the translators that you hire, they're going to be working in different delivery schedules based on virtually their territories, but they're working on different delivery schedules. So, Germans might be done quicker than the Spanish are done quicker. And so trying to manage what deliveries come in from a localization perspective, from a translation perspective, is difficult in and of itself. So having a centralized repository to be able to do that. And then ensuring that those assets delivered back to the developers are easy to plug into the game engine itself, and for rebuild to create those localized versions. So that localization can be in step with main SKU development, so that it can go to QA and linguistic QA at the same time and be tested in the same way and then be released at the same time. So just managing that whole process is what a content management system is supposed to do, and what we have worked towards establishing. So it's managing all those partners. It's managing your developer. It's managing your translators, and you're probably working with a bunch of different translators and different translation houses, so who have different schedules and different working environments and things like that. It's managing your QA and linguistic QA functionality to ensure that all of that is tight, and the integrity of the assets are complete, and that there's no niggly errors that are specific to one language versus another. I mean, we can there are tools like XLOC that can check for those to ensure that before it gets to the developers, all of those things that, like illegal characters that are not used in the engines and things like that, are taken care of prior to it getting to production, and then getting to QA, and then causing a progression block to ensure that you can't test any further, and then and then you're backtracking and you've lost all of that time. That's time that should be easily measurable, right? So it's things like that. It's just really streamlining that process to get localizations in step, and that's what that's always been our goal, because I saw it not be the goal or not be possible, really. And I'm like, no, there's no reason that it can't be. There's no reason.
So, and it's even, excuse me.
Oops, hang on.
It's even more important, for indie teams, because, Stephanie's talking about having professional localization houses, doing your translations and things like that. And those that exist, there are a ton of those companies, but a lot of indie teams, you're not going to have access to that. You're not going to have budgets. There is a lot of, fan done,
which is
localization.
fine.
Yeah. But, having something to be able to management. I mean, if you think that your, offshore translation houses have different schedules between them, where do you get fans in there that, they're not getting paid and they're doing this out of love, and, they're going to have their own schedules as well, to be able to properly manage that without literally putting a full-time producer on it, is phenomenal, basically.
Right. And in that respect, I mean, I think fan translations, my parent company, Keywords, probably wouldn't want me to say this necessarily, but I know that that's a reality. They know that it's a reality. And it's all about the integrity of the assets and the consistency of the tone of what the translations are. So it really sort of depends on how professional you want the output of the game to be. If you want it to seem like, and I'm not at all putting down fans that translate out of love for the game and love for the genre at all. I think that there can be great success in that. I would just be, if I were running that, I would be very particular about the quality of the tone of the game, because again, our goal with a localized product is to immerse the player in the experience in their native language. And if you are working on a game that is serious, but yet you get translations that are slangy, that's going to take people out of the experience.
Or the grammar is just terrible. I was just playing a game the other day where it was translated into English and the grammar was terrible. I'm like, I didn't even understand what some of it meant.
Right, exactly. And as US developers, sometimes we can be kind of ethnocentric in that respect and go, oh, it makes sense to me. What about all the other, and not really care about the other language. And I think if you're reaching that audience, you need to be cognizant of that, and you need to be aware of it, and you need to take that process. It's not just translations, which I think is really important too. And this is something I talk about at NC State as well. It's tone, it's grammar, it is content and concept. It's all of those things that, with the goal of immersing the player, because like Dan, you said, it's going to take you out of the game if you can't understand what the heck you're trying
sometimes
to
a
do.
direct translation just doesn't even make sense, or it's
It doesn't,
something
right.
in Chinese. The way they say things in Chinese is completely different in English, and if you were to just like direct translate it, people would be like, "This is weird," you know. They would be, they just would not get it,
right?
It's
With no
or they would, but they'd be like, "Oh, this is obviously translated."
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's all your bases are belong to us, right?
Mm.
Yes,
It's all that. And it's and that is the benefit of professional translators, professional game translators who have studied the genre, who understand the appeal and the idea, who will play the game early. I think that's really important, is to have your translators play the game, understand the context, understand what information is supposed to go in and what the tone is. That's imperative.
So what are some of the, and you just mentioned, you know, one of the things that you bring up the students at State, what are the key points that you always want to get across to those students? And we've covered things like, you know, planning for it from the get-go, and, you know, making sure you're going back and double checking this sort of stuff, you know, looking at our audience as that same type of, you know, market. What are the key points? What are the what are they called, tent poles that go along with it as you're talking to them?
The first one I would think is embrace your global market, and change or realign your thinking to think about your global market, and embrace it, and realize that it is it's a more macro look at what the potential is versus the micro look of, okay, I just want to make a shooter game, because again, with the backbone of bigger revenue, bigger audience, just to see your art, just to see the beautiful things that you've created, there's a bigger audience, there's more potential for success, I think, if you have that mindset. So that would be the first thing. And if you have that, then you would go, okay, well, if I've embraced my global market, then it should be easy to create my development structure, production structure to accommodate these ideas. Let's see, do I want to, which territories am I really interested in? And then appeal to those. And then do QA, do linguistic QA, have people look at it who speak the language, who know and understand what your goal and what you're trying to do is, and whether it appeals to them, whether you're getting your message across to those people and to that audience. Because you know, again, with the idea of embracing that global audience, to know that they can make or break, hopefully, your game's success through word of mouth and through downloads and through all of that stuff. So I think that really embracing just the whole concept. And when I go into the State and I talk to these kids about it, I mean, we're US based, we're all English based, and they've been playing Fortnite or they've been playing Call of Duty, and they only have that mindset. That's what they want to make. They want to make cool games, right? And few people have really considered bigger than the US or bigger than the English speaking population. And that's always really interesting to me. The people that do are, you know, kids that are really interested in anime or, you know, those types of different genres. So bringing that in and talking about it and talking about your global market is, I think, really valuable.
Anime hype.
There's a, you know, a very real situation now with the expanse of distribution options. Russia and China in particular, there are entire stores and huge distribution platforms that you can't even get on unless you have a, you know,
Russian
version
or
of the game, localized into, well, a publisher, or, you know, localized into those languages. So,
Sure.
and that's a whole other point right there. If we're looking at studios who are creating a game and they're not going to self-publish, they are going to go out and find a publisher. To be able to walk into that publisher meeting, with your pitch documents and say, and oh yes, by the way, we've been planning for localization, since day one, and this is how it's going to be easily done, and these are the languages we're looking at. That is a huge, that is a huge feather in your cap to going in, because what you've done is said, okay, here's your P&L, forecast for what this game is going to do. Now multiply that by 30, 40, 50%, because we've gone ahead and planned on this type of stuff.
Right. And exactly. What wonderful forethought that publisher is going to go, okay, these people have their shit together, because they understand where the market is and where we're at and why this is important. And hey, let's give them a little bit more money to be able to support this option.
Exactly.
That'd be great.
So, more money.
More money.
Are there any, if you all have any questions, throw them out. We still are, there are no dumb questions. I mean, this is why we're here. This is why we have Stephanie here to, help go through all of this and answer questions. And, I say that knowing that a lot of our viewers don't watch this live. They watch it on the VOD. So to you folks, send us a message on Discord and I'll get you, answers on that. But these are very real things that you need to take it, you need to be planning for. And, throughout all of our careers, we've seen things like localization and even QA. I've got horror stories on QA that tend to get shoved to the side.
QA.
Yes. I mean, I'm not lying. I got a little terrified a minute ago when you mentioned linguistic QA, because I was like, oh my God, there are.
But how invaluable, again, for that player experience, for that immersion, for all of that stuff. Kudos to those people that are sitting and testing and making suggestions and changes and for the love of the experience. Kudos to them.
Exactly. I mean, I'm sorry, I got derailed again with
Sorry.
Reading chat. No, not you. It's reading chat. I suck at this. I'm still, Indy's our streaming expert. I'm the one that gets all distracted by all the stuff going on all these different screens. But this stuff is important. I remember the question. So, at what level? I mean, because for most indie devs and most of the small studios out there, managing localization for the entire, eternity of, not eternity, but the entirety of the development process isn't exactly a full-time job,
right.
Until you get, where is that happy medium that you all see, if a studio is doing X amount of games, when does it make sense for them to bring somebody on internally versus look to outside resources to get some of this stuff done?
Well, I think it would depend on the scope of what territories you're trying to reach, the scope of languages that you're trying to do. And if you're using, tools, and if you set up the process early on, then you probably don't need to, you can have a production person, evangelizing for your localization process. It's when you're juggling a lot of games, and I would say a lot is even like 3 or 4, and with different release cycles and different processes like that. I think that at that point, you're really needing to have a way of, hopefully you've established a consistent localization process, regardless of the game, regardless of the engine, regardless of the developer. If you can establish the rules of how your localization process is going to run, then it's all about just keeping the process consistent. And I think that it seems to me, I mean, look, I run my life ad hoc in a lot of ways. I parent ad hoc, all of that stuff. But when you're looking at it from a business perspective, if you can set up routines and establish process, you're going to make your life easier, especially with localizations. And because there's so many things in development that are come at the 11th hour, or come at the last minute, and all these changes, but that don't necessarily have to mess with your localization process. If you can establish that early in and think about it, I think that is to your benefit. But again, when you're having to have all of those different plates spinning, different projects spinning, different production cycles spinning, then you really need to have somebody probably internal that is dedicated to that, as opposed to just pulling different people with different processes and things like that. That would be my recommendation.
Where are there resources that you have or that you can point to where teams can go initially and get an idea of how to set up that, consistent process early on?
There are books written on it. I was co-author of a book on it. It's a little bit old, but it's not old in the sense that the information is not the same, because all of the stuff that we're talking about is something I would have probably said 20 years ago, and we're still trying to play catch up with it. So it's establishing those processes. There are books. You can contact me. We have there are large localization companies. Our parent company, Keywords, is very interested in helping developers, small developers and large publishers, with the process. In fact, I would like to actually focus more on indie developers and really get them up and running. And I'm trying to establish some sort of program within our larger company to be able to do that through like universities and things like that, so that we have more resources and that we're evangelizing this process to help them along. I wouldn't say that we're there yet, because when you ask that question, I'm like, yeah, where do you go? Do you go to an employment agency and say, hey, I need a localization person? No, it's really word of mouth. It's so much word of mouth. But this whole industry has been word of mouth, and it's really actually pretty small. And especially if you've been in it for a while, people who know people, and that has been the basis of our success and my enjoyment in the industry is the people I know and the people that I've maintained relationships with for 25 years, and who I will reference and call when I need something that's very specific to where they are, and I keep track of where they are and where they're going and what they're working on and things like that. It's not in a stalking way by any means, but just using your resources and knowing it's all about who you know. In business in general, it's all about who you know. And so I would rely on references. I would rely on the depth of experience that people have had. That's what has got me this far.
So how big is the and I'm 100% with you on all of that, because that's what, like I said, got this channel started.
Right.
It's like, where do you go to learn business in the industry? It's not where, it's one, it's like so many, it's so unlike a lot of other things that, it's its own beast. But, how many are you seeing more indie teams, come to work with you all, or is your client still like a lot of the big publishers, or what has your experience been on the indie side?
So from an indie perspective, it's hard because they don't have necessarily the money. So we need to be able to do reach out and evangelizing to them. And I think that is, so it's almost like pro bono work from a lawyer perspective to be able to do that. The only thing that I have personally done is doing the reach out to the universities. I've had a couple conversations with long-term colleagues in the industry who are trying to reach out to indies that they know to establish a process for it. But as a small business owner, before we were acquired, that's a hard thing to do, because you weigh your time as to what you're able to work on versus trying to run a business. And I would love to see an organization established. I don't even know if should it be through, the LOCSIG, should it be through IGDA? None of that has really been established. That's an interesting concept. to establish this sort of helping group for growth for the industry itself. I think that that's probably something that's really needed.
So, and we're actually going to have Jen on, our executive director of the IGDA. She's going to be on next month.
Oh, cool.
Is there a localization SIG with IGDA?
There is. Yep, there is, and I follow them on Facebook, and they're supportive. They're supportive mostly of students or people that are trying to break into the translation industry. And that's always really interesting because it's less, because of what you say. I think that there's a lot of support from a translation perspective, although translators might disagree with me. I apologize if that's the case. But from a development and production side, it's harder to find that knowledge and people that are willing to impart the wisdom into it. So, but there is a LOC-SIG. There definitely is through IGDA.
And so, yeah, and obviously, if you're in the IGDA, then you can pull it up on their site. But then, like Stephanie said, there's Facebook and that sort of stuff as well. And, even Discord. I mean, I have fundamentally changed a lot of how I do business since we've gotten more and more into Discord. And we can jump over to different servers in different rooms. And, like Megacrit has their entire localization section, which I'm still so impressed with, given that they're a small, rookie company. But it takes studios like that who have gone out, and you see the big headlines in Gama Sutra and everything. It's like, Slay the Spire sold 700,000 copies thanks to China, because that's what it takes to get people to notice and to take it very seriously.
Well, and I would also say too that everybody's experience is very individualized. Is what I have experience in the 25 years that I've been doing this too. As much as you can generalize the conversation, and you can take nuggets of information from feeds and Facebook or whatever, I feel like people go, okay, yeah, but how does that apply to me? That's why it's always nice to be able to have a conversation with somebody and to have them come in even for a day and just say, okay, how are you setting this stuff up? And this is kind of what I would recommend. How could we restructure something like this? That even might be worthwhile in getting them here. I'm almost maybe I should just set up a side business to be able to do this, because I would love to do that and to be able to talk with people on just for a day and how to get set up, how to think about this process, what to do for them, and help them to get the first step on their way to localizations.
Okay, I'm with you. I have more fun doing this show than I've had in a very, very long time, because we do. I mean, obviously, Dan's passionate about the streaming side of this stuff. I'm passionate about the business side. I mean, you are keyed in on the localization side. We don't stay in this industry for 20 years because of the money. That's not happening.
No.
We stay in it because we love this stuff.
Yeah.
And to be able to have a platform to get out and share that knowledge and then see actual results come from it, it's what I love with this. And so I'll tell you now, if there are ways that we can help you, either through my team, of course, but through the channel as well, get out and do some of this stuff. I would absolutely love to do it.
I just need to because I have so many spinning plates too. I just need to take a plate off, but that would be my passion, and that would be what I would like to do going forward. Is I love the concept of teaching the new the younger folks how to do this.
The youngins. The youngins.
Those youngins.
The kids that are in their 30s.
Exactly. Those kids that are in their 30s who probably think they know more than me, but I've been doing this a while.
There's a lot that, we have a very, it's like Liam Neeson said, I have a very specialized skill set.
Exactly.
I can't do everything, but there's some things that I am really effing good at.
Yeah, exactly. And you want to work with people you want to work with. And I think that's, I always say that, and in some respects I think that's a funny way to say it, but it's true. You want to work with people that you can, that have integrity and trust and knowledge about what you're trying to do, and a sincere desire to help you. And that's why I was saying it's all well and good to have chats and conversations, and even this chat is relatively general, but to get down to the nitty gritty and to really talk about what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it is very personal, not from a personal perspective, but from a situation. And that's why those conversations are valuable.
So last question, and unless someone else has one out there, toss it up in chat, throw it in the Discord, let us know. And I can't believe I didn't throw this out earlier. Obviously, with a lot of tools, and even with, something as streamlined as what you all have built, you have to get it into the engine. So give us the high level on how you have actually, adapted the software to go with Unity and Unreal and all of these, engines that folks are using, where it's not, starting from scratch all over again.
So, well, effectively, it's all file-based. It's all file-based information. So there has to be a way from a developer's perspective to compile the text from an English or source perspective, and then from a language perspective. So it's all about APIs at this point. So it's pulling that data, putting it into XLOC, and XLOC being able to analyze what's changed, translators being able to access that data, plug it into their translation memory process, plug it back in, and then delivery via API functionality back into the engines. So we're working on refining that API functions to make it just less of button clicks, which is really not a ton of button clicks, because it can be set for times and specific runs at a specific time of day and things like that. So we're looking at that, but everybody wants something different, and that's the challenge that we have, is that as general of a tool as we're trying to be, we also have to maintain an openness to the architecture to be able to apply custom work and custom flags and custom calls, because everybody's production process is different. And whether you're working, regardless of what engine you're working with, everybody is set up different ways of wanting to manage their process. And we don't necessarily want to impede that. We want to enhance that. So that's what we work on the back end, is ways to be able to enhance that. So
that's awesome.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for the follow, CAFPCs. Thanks, buddy.
Yay, woohoo!
Okay, the follow dance.
So, I mean, we've covered all of my questions, and like you said, this is a very general discussion that we're having.
Yeah.
The goal being, folks need to realize that this is something that is important. It's not something you do at beta stage, and it can have a very
no. You should do it at before alpha stage. Early. Get in as early as you can.
And it goes beyond just the game, and that's something you have to keep in mind too. If you're promoting your game on Steam in German, you got to make sure that your marketing and your page materials, are translated as well.
Yeah.
So, it's not only your code, but it's making sure that your feature set and your unique selling points and all that kind of good stuff are, properly portrayed as well.
That's true. And so when you're in that vein, if you're dealing with fan-based translators too, are they going to be translating all your marketing? You have to have consistency across the board too, so that's something to consider. And that's one reason why working with a translation house, even a small one, which won't charge you necessarily the overhead or things like that, that a larger one might, being able to maintain that consistency, and even in the marketing materials, to have that tone and that same words and those same languages are so important to the overall experience.
So, I mean,
sorry to interrupt you.
No. This is what we do. We all sit around and we interrupt each other, and we forget what we're talking about, and that's just the beauty of this show. So, I mean, any parting thoughts? Any, last minute suggestions? I'll throw the website up there again.
Sure. I don't know, anything I haven't already said. Do your research, embrace your global market. That's what I would say.
This is
ultimately.
like a good intro to localization show for sure.
Right. Well, thank you.
I learned a lot because I didn't know anything about it at all. So.
Oh, cool. Well, I'm happy to help you, and I'm happy to help people. I mean, I am very open to communication. Virtually anybody that has contacted me, I'll reply. I'll talk about it. I love the opportunity to help and assist where I can.
So if, without me spamming out all your info across Twitch, if someone wants to get in touch and has a question for you, what's the best way to do that?
They can go to our website, info@xloc.com, or you can email me directly at stephanie@xloc.com. Very simple, very easy.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I just let me know that you listen to our conversation on Twitch, and that'll give me some frame of reference as to who you are and where you came from.
Why do I have all these random people?
Yeah, all these random people are talking to me. But we get that a lot. We get people at info@xloc.com that are asking us questions, mostly about the tool and things like that. But I'm happy to talk on a more broad sense from a localization perspective too.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah, thank you so
You're
much.
I love doing this type of stuff.
Yeah,
this
was a good one.
I thought I would be like, well, I don't know what to say, but I feel like I talked.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of those things that even when we sit down and I do have the forethought to say, okay, this is what we're going to cover today. For an hour and a half, I may have like 5 questions, and that's it, because we can go through and we can, discuss all these different stuff. And for folks that know their stuff and they're passionate about it, it's easy. We can all sit around and talk about what went right, what went wrong, and all that kind of stuff. So, all right. Well, if no one else has anything, Indy, do you have anything?
I'm good. That was good stuff.
Well, I'm good too. Don't forget to follow us. All the stuff that we're supposed to say that I never remember how to say.
And if you really want this awesome emote that you can use all over Twitch, you can sub too. Woo! I love indie games.
Yes, use your free sub. I mean, because we are all rolling in the cash over here.
Yeah,
I think we are up to like $20 a month maybe.
Really?
Which is not subsidizing my keg addiction. I'm just go ahead and say that. But yeah, follow us. Most importantly, let other people know. I mean, that's the biggest issue we have here is getting the fact that we're doing this out to the rest of the development community. Explaining to people that no, we're not just another channel on Twitch that's streaming Fortnite.
Well, I mean, we could stream Fortnite.
How do you localize Fortnite? Let's do this. No.
Oh,
that would be.
Yes.
Not any. Epic is our client. We love them completely. We help to localize Fortnite, but for the non-initiated, it might just be a little bit.
We get into a bunch of technicalities, and yes. How many words can you put dirt burger into?
Exactly.
What is the German word for dirt burger? So
it depends on the context and the tone of which you want to display on your game.
It's like a 3-hour discussion, right?
Exactly.
It's Das Der Burger. All right. So yes, follow us. Let us, let your friends know, let the rest of the community know that we're out here and we're doing this. If you have requests for topics that you want us to hit on, let us know that. We've done very specialized shows at users' requests before. And yeah, reach out if you've got questions.
Who do we have next month, Jay?
What's that?
Who do we have next month?
We have Jen, who's the executive director of the IGDA. We've also got Julia coming on from Tiny Build Games.
Very cool.
I would give you this big long runway of exactly who's going to be on the show, but quite frankly, we usually figure this out like 48 hours in advance. So again, we practice an agile methodology of show management and parenting.
And if you want to be on the show, we do have a link, don't we? Or is that something you got to message you to get the link for it?
For what link?
To be on the show, all the information.
Oh no, just email. Yeah, just send us a note. On our Discord or through
Twitter.
the site. Or, yeah, any of these things. I would say Twitter is probably the one you shouldn't use for me because I check it like so randomly. But there's a contact page on our website at thepowellgroup.com. Drop us a note on Discord.
Yeah, we'll talk about your game.
Yeah,
let's talk about your project.
Oh, you were talking about the submittal. I know what you're talking about now.
Yeah,
you were talking about developers with games.
Yeah,
there you go. So yeah, you can click that link and do a submission, and Indy and I will sit down, and we may bring some other folks on as well to go
hammer
through
your game
and give you and tell you how horrible it is and how it's never going to sell. But,
get your game crapped on.
That's what we do, with the intent of making it better, not the intent of making tears shed or anything. But yeah, that's it. I'm good. If y'all are, thank you, Stephanie.
Yes, thank you.
Welcome. Thank you guys so much. It was a pleasure.
All right. Let's do it.
Right.
Bye.
Bye.